just to get us talking, like how what were you working on in these last couple of years?
Yeah, yeah. So right now I'm working full time at a company called Wildflower Interactive. I'm the audio designer on the team there. So primarily I'm doing sound effects for that team.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also managing a lot of like partners. So we have a composer that we've hired separately, and we have a dialogue team that we're working with separately, and a Foley team that we're working with separately.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not like on my team specifically, but I get to work with a lot of cool people. And that studio is currently working on our first game that has not been announced yet, but we're very excited for that. Um, Prior to that, I had been working at Sony Immersive Music Studios, which was kind of like an internal Sony team making music focused experiences for PlayStation 5 and other platforms.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't ship a whole lot while I was there because it was a very experimental team, but it was fun and interesting, and there was a lot of cool tech that we built out while we were there. And they're making some great stuff now. I really liked everybody on that team, but it's been a long time since I've been on that team.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of smaller projects, a lot of student short films. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but every year I work with this French film school called ESMA, ESMA, and basically I get an email around this time every year asking if I'm interested in writing something for a thesis film, and it's just a pro bono thing to help the students get their projects finished. But they're always really interesting and exciting and well animated. And the people who graduate from that school end up in some really cool places. Like the first team that I worked with was actually an animator I met while playing Team Fortress 2 in 2013.
Yeah.
And now he's working at Disney in Vancouver, and he worked on the Super Mario Brothers movie. So like, I got to work with some pretty cool animators from that school.
Great career trajectory for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other big thing I've been working on that still hasn't shipped is Flintlock. It's the game out of A44 Games. It's their follow up after they finished Ashen. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a black gunpowder version of Dark Souls. It's a little
Yeah.
more Fallen Order than it is Dark Souls, but it's in that
Mm.
Souls like feel. I've been doing sound effects for like the bosses and all the ultimate abilities in the UI and stuff, so I'm excited for that to come out eventually.
Awesome. So, I was just wondering, what's your process for making sounds for those video games? Is it all out of the box, or do you just do some stuff that's purely just inside the computer that
Sure.
you don't even go out to record?
It's a little bit of both, because the getting out to record part requires time, and when you're the only person on a team and you have a lot of stuff that you need to do all the time, it's hard to set that time aside. So you have to really be intentional to set time aside to go record. So I try and get out whenever I can to actually make something from scratch or go out to like somewhere to get some ambience recorded or source material. But lately, I find myself using stuff that I already have in my library as source material a lot. I'm
Mm.
always manipulating that. I'm not really ever dropping stuff in just straight out of the box most of the time. There's a lot of like, I have all of this stuff already. How can I leverage this to make the best possible sounding thing for whatever this feature is right now?
Right. I've seen how like a lot of the gore sounds for Mortal Kombat are made. So what's the weirdest? So what's the like the weirdest process you've ever had to do to get a sound that you want?
Um, That's a good question. Weirdest thing. Yeah, I think gore is always one of those things that's really weird because like my wife suffers from something called misophonia, so she has a visceral reaction to certain sounds, and a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
sounds are like bodily in nature. So like lip smacking and chewing really bother her. So there was a period of time when we were both working in the same room, and I would have to record like my hands squishing together a bunch of wet pasta in my hands, and you could see her just be so upset that I was doing that in front of her. Um, so like anything gore and body related, I think naturally is gonna be weird. Um,
Yeah.
but I think just voice stuff is probably one of the weirder things when you have to get down to like moaning and groaning and pain sounds. It can get
Mm-hmm.
really uncomfortable and really like intimate in a way. um, so I think that's probably weirdest is just like getting moaning and groaning and sounds of someone like in pain.
Yeah, moaning and groaning. Weirdly enough, I had somewhat of a similar experience when I had to teach a vocal student. Um, I don't do that a lot, but specifically teaching voice is so weird because you have to show them how to produce uh, kind of a more open, less kind of a constrained sound. And oftentimes, to get those higher notes, you have to get a moaning kind of physical gesture and open your mouth a lot. And it was so weird to just describe the whole process and to do it in front of the student. And it's not a pretty sight usually. Weirdly
Yeah,
enough,
sure.
it's always pleasant for the ears, but yeah. Or looking at the people singing in the choir. But I was wondering, how did you get involved in music? So what was your starting point? What interested you in music and sound?
I mean, we could go all the way back to when I was a kid. My parents were very musical. My dad was a drummer. My mom was a singer. Not professionally, but that's just like things that they did. And I started learning an instrument in fifth grade. I was in like the fifth grade concert band, and by concert band, I put heavy quotes. There was like 6 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I started learning then, and then I went to a public school where there was actually a concert band program, and I
Mm-hmm.
got really interested in performing and playing music. Um, and at a certain point, I started to realize that film scoring was a job, and I really wanted to find a way to do that. So I started jumping on forums like guerrilla filmmakers and just offering to like do stuff to learn because I had no idea how it worked. Um, I think that was like the start of high school when I started doing that. And eventually, I got into film school, and I just kept doing the same kind of thing, but with people who were actually making movies, uh, and it just kind of kept exploding from there. Right before I graduated college, I found out about game scoring. I mean, I knew it existed, but like, there was a program at school teaching how to make games. It was the NYU Game Center. It had just started when I was about to graduate. So I started going to game jams. I started working with people all the time. Um, but yeah, if we go all the way back, it's really just like I've been playing music since I was a kid, and I just kept on finding new ways to like expand the career of it rather than just being a performer. I found that I could write. I found that I could write for movies. I found that I could write for games. Um, and then the sound stuff just kind of came as a byproduct of that. While I was in school, like I realized how much cool stuff there was to do in sound design, and I'd been getting into synthesis at the same time. So like it just all kind of meshed and kept expanding and expanding as time went by.
I, I was wondering, especially like knowing that there's plenty of noise music or I don't know spectralist music if you're getting into more that kind of stuff. How does your sound effect and sound design expertise influence your music making?
Yeah, I think especially lately, I've started noticing that I'm more um, intentional about my choices of things as far as instruments and um, reverbs, and if I'm working with like synths, how I'm going about designing them. Like in the past, I used to just be like, oh, this kind of part would be written for a string, so I'm going to do that on strings. Now I'm thinking more like this needs more warmth than it has, so I'm going to put it on cello instead of putting it on violin.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking about the timbres of things now more rather than just the music theory of things. Um, and like especially with synthesis, like I'm not just looking for presets anymore. I tend to start with a preset just to like give myself some inspiration, but very much lately I've been finding myself like swapping out wavetables or even drawing my own. I got into I really like using phase plant, and I've been doing a lot of like really in-depth design work on that, like drawing my own wavetables to get certain sounds. Um, so I think those are the biggest ways. Is like I'm not just coming at it from a arrangement or a theory perspective. I'm coming at it from a timbral analysis perspective. The goal is more to create a certain sound palette rather than just a feel.
Yeah, and especially like getting away from using presets, that's where you get more of your unique timbral sounds, and this is something that could help differentiate just good music from great, unique, and individual music.
Totally. Yeah, and that's not to
Um,
say that like presets are bad. I think presets are really good and useful. Someone spent a lot of time making those, and they want them people to use them. At a minimum, it's a great starting point. At its best, it's something that just fits perfectly in whatever you're making. So,
yeah, I wonder. So especially when it comes to using, let's say, orchestral libraries, so you can do a lot of tweaks when you're using, let's say, VST uh, synths, but when it comes to using just your typical orchestral strings, there's not that much you can do, right?
sure. Yeah, at least with like individual libraries, you're limited to what they provide you, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's where like a lot of working composers nowadays, they're always layering stuff. Like you're not
Mm-hmm.
just going to use Berlin strings. You're going to use Berlin strings and cinematic strings, or that and um, like if we go full Hollywood epic, we're going to do like damage drums plus we're going to put some sub sine waves underneath it. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
we're not just using the one thing and forgetting it anymore. We are melting pot our sounds together. And then even further than that, like there's been a lot more effort in physical modeling lately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I don't know if you saw the Anne Catherine Dunn video about V sounds. I think it's V sounds. I'm gonna look real quick. Acoustic samples. Acoustic samples is mostly physically modeled instruments, and they sound amazing. And the benefit of physical modeling is it increases your playability because you're not worried about working around samples. You're playing with something that
Mm-hmm.
is modeled to be playable. So like that kind of stuff, plus throwing in like I've seen some really insane recreations of concert instruments in Phase Plant and Vital. Like the stuff that Joel Blanco Berg is doing with Phase Plant to recreate classical instruments is insane. So taking those things and then layering them in with like sample libraries and Contact gives you a lot more control. You can crossfade if you need something to stick out a little bit more. If you want something absolutely dry, you can like stick with something that's modeled, or even go with like specific sampling techniques. Like Vienna Symphonic Library has a vastly different sampling method than cinematic
Mm-hmm.
strings would, right? Like the stuff you get from VSL can be super, super dry and super tweakable, but it's a lot harder to work with than it would be like a lot of Contact libraries. But there's a nice in between with all of these tools, which then begs the question like, how much money should you be spending on VSTs? Um, um, but then you start talking about things like, Piano Book, which I'm trying to avoid using because of the Spitfire relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But stuff like that exists that you can all add into your toolkit to really have tweakability. I think I got a little away from your question, but
No, yeah, it's all just very fascinating and interesting. One one thing that I also wanted to highlight is that orchestration influences timbre as well, and so getting back to just your regular run of the mill string orchestra, for example, the way that some composers orchestrate and which voicings they use highly influences the sound, and so one composer's strings will sound just from the get go will sound very different from another, and that's where like, orchestration comes into play. Yeah, and I also remember that I remember you telling me that you taught you taught sound production at a community college. That's right.
Yeah. I was teaching a variety of classes at Portland Community College, but the
Mm-hmm.
main gig was I was the recording studio technology professor. I also
Mm-hmm.
managed the recording studio there. And then over the years, I taught a few other classes. I taught a multimedia ensemble class.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
That was an interesting one. It was basically making it up as we went along, but it was very fun. And then but right before I stopped working there, I wrote a 3-course series on game audio, and they're still teaching
Mm-hmm.
that series of courses. So
That's that's great, and I was wondering why did you choose, uh, let's say, video game composition and sound design over teaching? Was there a particular reason?
yeah, there's a handful of reasons. The long and short of it is that teaching, even at the community college university level, is still not that lucrative. I think it's probably better if you're working like as a tenure track professor at a university. But considering like the fact that I had student loans and where my wife and I were with our life, and the fact that we wanted to have kids and get a house, the income for teaching was not enough on its own. And there's a lot of extra expectations that you have. You have to grade papers outside of class. You have to, for me, I had to run labs. I had to be in the studio with students, showing them how stuff works, make sure nothing breaks. And that was all ancillary to actually teaching. Um, my income was just not quite where it needed to be. Um, I loved teaching. If I could teach and do what I do now at the same time, I would love to, but the schedules are also pretty restrictive. It's like
Yeah,
2 to 5 in the middle of the day or something like that. Um, but yeah, I'm not saying I would never teach again. It just didn't work for my life at the time.
that's understandable. I'm at a crossroads right now where I'm thinking of pursuing a PhD in in music composition, but then at the same time, teaching here in the United States is way more lucrative than back home, but still, even compared to being a composer or someone else in the field, that's less lucrative. But so I'll have to make that decision in the next couple of years, I suppose.
Well, the other
Um,
thing that you have to remember is that like I originally started teaching because I needed a job,
mhm,
and I had done a lot of work in music and sound, but I was at a period of time where I wasn't getting a lot of work.
mhm,
I'd been almost exclusively freelance until about 2020,
mhm,
um, and freelance just has its ups and downs. Sometimes you have long periods where you don't get any work, and that was just kind of how it was going. So as a freelancer, being a freelancer and a teacher at the same time worked great for multiple reasons because like your schedule is a little more flexible. You have a couple of blocks of the day you just can't do anything,
mhm.
but it was related. It was a nice additional income. And the extra perk for that specific job was I could mix in the studio at the school. I didn't have a studio space at the time because I was still saving up for a house.
Mhm.
So having a space that was fine tuned, had really nice speakers, had a console and a lot of outboard gear I could work with. I could even go and record whenever I needed to. It was nice to have that as a bonus. Like that was one of the biggest perks of that job. But um, if I had not taken that job, I probably would have still been struggling just to make ends meet. So I think
Mhm.
it works great if the flexibility of schedule works for a freelancer. It's just harder to do if you have a full time job. And as composers and sound designers, it's probably one of the more competitive fields in both film and games.
Mhm.
So like you mentioned earlier that it's easier to get a job as a sound designer than a composer, which is true, but it's ridiculously hard for either anyways. There's just not
Yeah.
that many jobs out there. And for composers especially, there's not like job postings. Usually like you'll see an open call somewhere, or you'll have to know somebody who's looking for a composer for something. You know, every so often you'll see a job at like Riot Games looking for a production person or a composer, but then the applicant pool for that is in the hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah. From all around the world, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, and all manner of skill level too. There was one one project I tried to apply for, and I got into like a second round of interviews, and then I found out that like Junkie XL was also in consideration for it, and I was like, oh, I'm not getting this. There's no way I'm getting this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane. Um, but one thing that fascinated me when I first met you is that you had a Dota 2 expansion pack of music on your resume. So I was just wondering, how did that opportunity come along?
It was a fever dream of a weekend that made it happen. So it was basically spec work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2015, I think it was like February. Um, Dota was doing their annual New Bloom event. It's a Chinese New Year event they do every year, and
Mm-hmm.
usually it's like, here's a new map, here's some skins, here's some like new game modes, stuff to do. But they have this thing that they did called the Call to Arms. And if you've ever spent any time in like Team Fortress 2 or Dota, you know that there's people in the community called the Workshop who make skins and other cosmetic items for the game. So Dota does it differently than TF2. TF2 is just kind of on a rolling basis. They'll find stuff that they like in the workshop and choose to ship it or not. Dota 2 does it based on events. So for the new Bloom, they were like, here's the theme, here's the color palette, make some stuff for us. And I, on a Friday night, the deadline for the Call to Arms was Sunday at midnight. On
Mm-hmm.
Friday night, I was like, a music pack would be cool. They don't really have a music pack tool. I'm just gonna make something. So I made a battle track,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I made it in like 3 hours, and then I uploaded it to YouTube, and I shared it on the Dota 2 Reddit, and I got so many replies because I posted it, and it was midnight on Friday, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to make all the tracks I need. I need to make 30 minutes by Sunday night. How am I
Mm-hmm.
gonna do that? But I posted it and said, I'm not going to have time to finish this, but I started working on this. I thought it was cool and wanted to share. And then I got a bunch of people saying, do it, keep doing it, keep doing it. So then I was like, okay, I'll try. And I just worked from then all the way till Sunday night. And I was posting updates as I went. And at 11:15 on Sunday night, I hit submit. I uploaded everything to YouTube and I posted it on the Reddit, and I think I got like 1,000, 2,000 upvotes on it.
Mm-hmm.
The following day, I get an email from Valve saying, "Hey, we saw your like push on Reddit for your music pack, and we liked what we heard, and we really admired your effort. We'd love to consider putting this in, but you have some work you need to do. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't sound as good as it needs to go in the game." And they had like mixed comments and some orchestration comments, but it was essentially me going back and forth with Tim Larkin, who is the composer
Mm-hmm.
at Valve. Um, Aside from Mike Moraski, Tim Larkin does the more orchestral stuff, so he does everything on Dota. But he kept on giving me all kinds of advice, told me how to master it, what levels everything should be at. We uploaded it to their FTP, and then it just went dark. I didn't hear from them for a while. And then
Mm-hmm.
the event started happening. I started seeing posts about the event, and I kind of went, okay, they probably didn't want to use it then. So it was a good experience, but I'll save it for something else. And then on day 2 of the update, they post this page about the new character, and I'm scrolling through it. And at a certain point, I scroll past something where it like shows what the new map is like, and I hear my music start playing on the web page. And I keep scrolling down, and then I see the cover art for the album that they made for me with my name on it, and they say that they're shipping the music pack, and I was just like, what? Um, so that happened the next day. They played the main title theme I made on the last update page, and then it went up for sale as soon as the update shipped. So it was entirely luck and chance and the fact that they liked what I made. Um, but it's in the game now, and it's still for sale, and people still tell me they like it. So I am very happy about it.
Yeah, this is such a terrific experience, but it's not just like you were actively. I mean, you did something and it paid off, and most of the time it just doesn't pay off. But
Yeah,
in this case,
totally.
it did.
Yeah. No,
So
yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could do something like that again just in that shorter period of time. Because like the actual writing of the pieces did not change much from when I submitted it to when they said they wanted it. They just wanted like it mixed better.
yeah,
But like I wrote 30 minutes of music in 72 hours. I don't know how I did that.
so you didn't get any sleep
I don't,
between
I I
Saturday.
frankly don't really remember if I did. I maybe got a few hours here and there, but I do not remember.
Yeah, yeah. As I'm growing older, I realize that I'm not able to pull all nighters just to finish something in a in a very short span of time. It, yeah, that's
I do think that people like us, like in our profession, there is kind of an expectation that you do that you try that you'll pull a lot of all nighters. And I don't necessarily want to say it's crunch because crunch is a thing that we deal with, but I think there's a difference when it comes to like music writing specifically. Um, if there was anything that I could like give to new composers, it's like to not worry so much about pulling those all nighters. And I think the reason why it's alluring is because sometimes when you're sleep deprived, you make some amazing stuff. You make this like these things that you would never have made before, and I think really all it is that you're just not questioning yourself. You're not second guessing yourself. You're just going. You know, you're using the skills you've acquired, and you're just making. It's that whole. It was what's that writer's name? It's the Hemingway quote. I think it's a Hemingway quote
mm-hmm.
where he says to write drunk but edit sober. And all it is you're removing that barrier. Like I don't like the idea that you need to be drunk to make something,
Yeah,
but it's just the idea that you want to get rid of that second voice that's questioning you, that's stopping you
yeah.
from making stuff.
Don't judge while writing, but judge when editing. That's the
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the idea. And you were going to say that for you.
Oh yeah. So for the
Uh,
longest time it was sleep deprivation for me. If I did not sleep, I was making these really creative and interesting things. Um, but you know, especially now that I am a dad of twins, like I need all the sleep I can get. So learning the strategies to like pull that creativity out of that recess of your mind that's unlocked with sleep deprivation early on in your creative journey is really important. Like, don't break your body just to be creative. Um, it's easier said than done, but that's probably the biggest thing that I wish that I had figured out earlier in life was to really prioritize taking care of my health and my sleep and figuring out the strategies I needed to be creative when I wanted to.
yeah, that's real. But also, people just got to figure out what works for them. So some people might be able to pull all nighters and feel relatively okay, while
Yeah,
others
totally.
just um, yeah. I have this person that I know who's a much more well established composer, and he says that he just doesn't work when he's tired.
Yeah,
He only
that's
works like in the mornings for in a very condensed amount of time, but very uh, very precisely, very actively, and then yeah, he stops working.
sure. I
Uh,
mean, that sounds great to me.
yeah, for sure.
The one thing I worry about with people with that whole like sleep deprivation conversation is I think it's really easy for people to judge one way or the other, whether or not it's
Mm.
judging, oh, you need to take care of your health better, or oh, you're not willing to put in the time and pull an all-nighter to get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's really easy for people to go one way or the other, especially when you're new and you're like hustling to try and get work. So I just wanted to be clear that like me saying that people should prioritize their health and their sleep is not a judgment. It's just something that I think is really valuable. And I hope that other people don't judge for those kinds of things either.
Sure. Um, I mean, it's about how well you produce and how if you produce in a timely manner. And one other thing that comes into play is how well you can plan in advance, and this goes into my next question that I had. So, video games have a much larger span of development than films usually, of like active development. So it's usually at least multiple years. So, in sound people are involved for you know involved in a single project for multiple years. So how do you plan your work in advance for, like, let's say you have 2 or 3 years to work on a project? Do you plan this much in advance?
I will say, as far as a music composition perspective, I haven't had the luxury of being on projects that early on. Most of the time, when I'm doing the music side of things, I'm brought in within the last year of production, which
Mm-hmm.
which is still a good deal of time to do some pre-production work, make stuff, make sure it all works in the game. But I would much rather be in early on a lot of projects.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the sound design projects I'm brought in on are usually like beginning to mid production because there needs to be support during development to make sure that features work.
Yeah.
Like when they're playtesting the actual game itself and making sure a mechanic works, sometimes the sound is required to really sell it. So as far as like on any individual project, it's really difficult to project far out on how many things need to get done when they need to get done. And like on the project I'm on right now, Wildflower, we're so early in production that I'm not even sure how many characters we're going to need to record for voice
Mm.
acting. So I'm like anticipating a certain amount of characters, even though we might have none or we might have more than I'm expecting. Like it's all about making educated guesses and anticipating what you think you might need. I think the more projects that you end up on, it becomes easier to like nail down. We need X amount of time for this, X amount of time for this. But it's really just about like anticipating scope and then kind of trying to budget in as much as you can as far as time. When it comes to like freelancing and having to manage multiple projects at a time, that's when it starts to become really important to have stuff on a calendar somewhere, have a to-do list somewhere. For the longest time, I used to use like project management tools like Airtable,
Mm-hmm.
and I just like at a certain point realized that that just was not working for me. So now what my list of things is I have Trello to keep track of individual tasks and like projects as a whole. I have stuff on my calendar on Google Calendar for deadlines. And then I use Notion and some like local note taking stuff for keeping track of revisions, notes I've been sent, what a certain project might need at any given time, things like that. And then like to get further granular, it kind of depends on the project, but like using things like Jira or UTrack or GitHub issues to just keep track of specific things on a given project is really important as well. Because the way that my day works is I'll usually wake up, I'll fire up Trello, see what I have on my to-do list board. I have a board for that given week, and then there's three
Mm-hmm.
columns on that week. Well, there's the active day, there's tomorrow, and then the last column is like I'd like to get to these things, but we'll see if I do. And then I start the day and I move stuff around to where I think it belongs. And then beyond that, I have a backlog board, which is just all of the tasks that I know have to be done at some point or even like personal things that I can't do right now. They all go in there. And then I just move those over to the to-do list board at the end of the week. If there's something there that I think needs to be done now, then I move it over to the to-do list board.
Do you
So
have
that's yeah. So go
yeah,
ahead.
did you ever have the luxury of not keeping notes when working on freelance projects? Like you just kind of remember I have to get this done by, I don't know, January 1st. No,
I think
keep
I think the
chugging
only
along.
project that was like that was the Dota project because it was just so breakneck in pace. Um, but no, and I think I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but in 2022 I actually got diagnosed with ADHD,
Hmm.
and my doctor thinks I've had it my entire life. Um, so I don't think that I could be successful if I did not have external ways to keep track of things. If I just had to
Hmm.
keep track of it all in my head, I think I would fail miserably.
Because, yeah, well, I hope that your ADHD is not interfering with your workflow and with your
Oh no,
process.
no, no, no. I mean, I've molded my workflow around it.
Yeah,
Without even knowing that I had it, I've made my workflow work. Like you said earlier, like people are gonna do what works for them.
sure.
And it took me a while to figure out what works for me, but I've found that out and I've been using that method for a decade now, and I consider it working.
Yeah. I mean, I've done multiple attempts to rigorously keep track of all of my tasks and goals
Yeah.
in that same way, and it, you know, at some point it just keeps falling by the wayside at some point, and I just kind of vaguely keep track of, you know, the deadlines on my Google Calendar and kind of vaguely try to remember, you know, these are the things I have to do this week. But then I'm not fully employed um, in a, let's say, a video game company where you have to get stuff done every. So I have a lot of freelance and I have part time work. I was just wondering, since you're now fully, you know, full time employed at a video game company, is it, do you work by hours or do you work by tasks and goals that you have to complete each week?
So I'm a salaried employee, so technically my hours can be whatever I need to be to get the tasks done. We
Mm-hmm.
do have a core working day, which is like roughly 9 to 6. So I try to be available during those times. But I do base my work day around what I need to get done rather than like
Mm-hmm.
I need to be working for 6 hours today.
Yeah.
So like today I've been working on some creature design stuff. Like I need to get that creature design stuff done by the end of the day so I can send it off for review. So that's all I'm focusing on today. But I could be done in an hour after our call, or it could take me the rest of the day. And if depending on what happens, I can then move on to something else that I might have on my backlog.
Right.
But like I'm basing today around the one thing.
Mm-hmm. That's good strategy. Yeah, I hope I won't take up too much of your time so that you're able
Oh
to
no,
get
do
to
not
finish
stress
what
about
you're.
it.
Okay. I was just wondering, the other thing is that I know how busy you are, and people have a tendency to just get busier and busier as time goes on. So I was wondering, do you have any time to work on your passion projects? So just the type of music that you yourself want to do that doesn't
Yes.
necessarily attach itself to any external project.
Yeah, so yes and no. Right now I'm trying to finish an album by the end of the year. Trying to make
Mm-hmm.
a cyberpunk EDM album. I have 4 out of 7 tracks that I wanted to do for it, mostly done. Um, but it kind of comes down to um, effort level. Because for me, the
Mm-hmm.
big thing is if I can start working on something, I can generally get it done because I'll be entranced in the work. The big problem is getting over that initial hump to get started.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will start to realize is like getting over that hump is going to take me half an hour, and I have half an hour's worth of work to do on something else, so I'm going to do that instead.
Yeah.
Um, so I do have some time, but it's not necessarily as much as it used to be. Like back in 2016 when I was doing that song a day project. I don't know if I ever showed you that.
I've seen it on your YouTube channel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's quite intense. Although
it
so
was.
that
that
seems
seems
Yeah,
like a
like a
good
good training.
yeah, it was a
exercise.
good year. Um, but when I was doing that, I had the time to sit down and make something every day. Not everything was made from scratch. Some of it was like, oh, I'd started this like jazz project that I never finished. Let's finish that up for Song a Day. But it still required like 4 to 8 hours a day to maintain. And I was teaching at the same time. So I do still have time to do passion projects like that album I was telling you about, but it's not quite as much. So when I do the passion project, I view it as a form of meditation almost or stress relief. And I only do this passion project if it really, really is engaging me that day. And kind of on that note, like I mentioned, the Trello boards I have a board that's just called Creative, and it's you look at it and it's just an insane mass of text, but all it is every card is a creative idea I've had that I want to revisit at some point. So there's like hundreds of things in there, and there's one column that's stuff that's really grabbing my attention, and I'll visit that and be like, what of these is really like exciting me right now? And then when I have free time, I will address the most exciting thing. So like the Cyberpunk album is my most exciting thing right now. And when I sit down, like if I get my kids to school early enough, I can come home and have an hour before work, and I can sit down and I can make something. Um, but I don't. I try to give myself a lot of grace when it comes to those things because at the end of the day, it's for me. And if I'm not gonna get time to do it, I'm not gonna make myself feel bad for not having time to do it. Um, you wanna get joy out of it. You wanna get personal fulfillment out of it. So you have to approach it in a way that does not make you feel bad. um,
Yeah. Um, I mean, you've touched on so many interesting points and things that I'm just kind of at a loss for words. Uh,
I do tend to ramble a bit, so I apologize for that.
no need to apologize. I was just trying to kind of collect my thoughts to ask a question that would be a good continuation of what you were talking about. Um, I feel like some people hesitate quite a bit when it comes to doing work for themselves, and they tend to procrastinate way more than when they're doing, let's say, a task that was assigned to
Yeah,
them by, let's say, by their
somebody
by somebody,
that they have
and
some
that has a
relation
strict.
responsibility to.
Yeah, so people tend to prioritize tasks that have, that somebody assigned to them, that's work, and
Yeah,
they tend to be way more productive on them rather than on things, even, let's say, even creative things that they can later share with people that they themselves want to do. So did you have any um, so do you have like any expectations at all for, this is the project that I want to do, I want to get it done by this point, or do you just let it just naturally uh, kind of lay there until you get your inspiration and time to fully
yeah.
complete
I
it?
will answer that question, but I had one thing I wanted to say based on something else you said. Um, yeah, prioritizing the things that you want to do versus like the tasks you've been assigned. It comes down to like a value judgment. I think a lot of times, like a lot of people view it as which of these is going to give me the most value in my life, and that doesn't necessarily have to be monetary value, but what value am I getting out of it? Which I think could be a good way of viewing it, but it has its pitfalls, and it's very easy to fall into that trap of like I'm only doing the things that make me more money. Um, and it made me think of like when we were young and first learning an instrument, um, we would put all that time into practicing it because we wanted to get better at the instrument. And getting better, doing that practice is what makes us able to be effective and efficient. Like doing a rescore of a film scene or analyzing and breaking down the way that like the Jurassic Park theme was written is how you get good at doing those things. Like if you want to write something that sounds like that, you need to know how to do it. So you need to spend the time working on it. To now get to your point, do I just let stuff lie or do I set deadlines? I like to set a deadline for myself so that I can motivate myself to work forwards towards it. That doesn't mean that deadline cannot change. So sometimes it does just sit there for a while. Like this Cyberpunk album I keep bringing up, I announced it on YouTube at the end of 2020. I said I'm gonna release this album in 2021, and we're now almost at the end of 2023, and I'm not done with it. So like I put an external goal out to the world, and I didn't meet it. But it doesn't matter too much because it wasn't for anybody but me. And I still plan on doing it, and I'm going to do it, and I'm now actively working on it. And in the meantime, in between there, I did all kinds of other stuff that was personal and that I really liked. I spent a lot of time working on chiptune. I started learning how Eurorack synths work. I've gotten more into DIY electronics. I've been just doing things here and there that are for me that scratch the same itch without necessarily having to be the project that I assigned myself. So I think setting deadlines for yourself can be good if that's the kind of thing that motivates you. But I do think a lot of people, especially creative people, when they set a deadline and don't meet it, they start to judge themselves. They start to knock themselves down for not meeting that deadline. So like grace is the biggest thing I wish any creative person could learn to give themselves. It's just like, it's okay. You're going to do it when you want to do it. Set the deadline to motivate yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you don't meet it. Because you're also living life. You're doing your other work. You're being a human. You've got everything on your plate all at the same time, and you're trying to do something for yourself.
Yeah. Also, when maybe you've had that, maybe you haven't. If you don't set your expectations too high, then I think everything's all right. So even when, let's say, I'm doing something for myself, which might be a passion project like an album, if it doesn't resonate well with people, like if it doesn't get at least some like substantial good feedback, then I get frustrated as well. So even though it was a passion project for just for myself, then I still have some sort of expectation of it performing well, or if it getting certain amount of views and comment.
Yeah,
And
no, I feel that too, and like I think that there's a couple things there because like the first thing I thought of was like whenever I release an album, I don't expect it to make any money. I'm not releasing an album to make money. It would be great if it does, but that's not the expectation. So whenever I like work on a game and I quote somebody a price, I quote assuming that the album's making nothing. Because I have no control over that. That's just the whims of what people want to listen to. But there's a whole industry of people whose job it is to make albums and have them make money. And there's just a different headspace there. Like when you have to go into it with the goal of making people like it, making people listen to it, making people pay for it, you're going to make vastly different stuff than what you would make for yourself. And there's an argument to be made that like if you're not truthful to yourself, it won't be successful anyways. But I think the level of success for something like that versus like Katy Perry's new album is different. Like we don't have a metric to meet other than the metrics we set for ourselves. And that doesn't mean don't be ambitious. Like if you want to make something that gets 1 million streams, go for it. But that's going to change how you produce it. That's going to change how you make your art because you're now having a different goal than I want to make a neoclassical piano piece. I'm making a neoclassical piano piece that needs to get 1 million views. So how do you do that? You change fundamentally what you're making. So it's a game of compromises and artistic expression.
For sure, yeah, but at the same time, you always hear those quotes that you never follow the money, and then you become successful somehow. With
Yeah.
Even in other realms, like I recently been delving more into David Lynch's work, uh, the director, and he said that he's never had any ambitions of doing anything commercially
Yeah.
viable.
Yeah.
Even.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with a lot of those sentiments fundamentally, but I do think a lot of it is we unfortunately do live in a world that's it's very capitalist focused. Like in order to be successful, you do need to do things as a creative at least, you do need to make things that other people are going to enjoy. And like if I just made the music that I wanted to make 100% of the time, I would
Mhm.
probably never be working in games because I'd be making like prog rock with chiptune instruments that last for 30 minutes at a time because that's what I loved growing up. Like that's
Yeah.
what I would have been doing. Um, and like you know, those things on their own would probably be useful in certain circumstances, and a lot of that influence still shows up. Like if you've ever listened to my DOTA 2 albums, it's that's basically what it is. But it's because those work because of the audience that it's going to and who wants to listen to it. So yeah, it's kind of hard because like you don't want to tell people to not be themselves, right? You don't want to tell people to
Sure.
not follow their dreams or to compromise their dreams. But I think what it really comes down to is looking at what you want to achieve and how to make that happen. And sometimes it's not going to be 100% you. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean that it's still not you. You're the one doing it, you're the one putting your skills into it. But it's not always going to be 100% authentically you. It might be 90% or maybe sometimes 50%. And like in some cases it's 10%. Like I've done a bunch of work for slot machine games and
Hmm.
those are like 5% my style. I'm literally just making them because you know it's a really good paycheck and it's work and I needed to do the work. Um, that doesn't mean I didn't put my all into it. It doesn't mean that I can't say it's work that I'm proud of. But it's not. It was a compromise in order to make the money for that. So the big thing I worry about is having this conversation and like people walking away from it being like, "Oh, bummer, man," because like, okay, let's step back for a second. I'm gonna get a little bit personal for a second. For the
Sure.
longest time, I only wanted to be a film composer. I wanted to
Hmm.
be scoring feature films, and when I was in school, I was working towards that, and I'm still working towards that. But like my expectation was by the time I'm 35, I will have scored at least one, maybe two feature films. Feature films where I get to actually go record an orchestra. That was the goal. And I'm 32, going to be 33 in a couple of months, and I have scored a feature, but it was made entirely in the box, and it was made zero money because it was just a friend from college and I doing a passion project. Um, I but in its place, I've worked on a bunch of AAA games. One of the games I worked on ended up in a Jacob Geller video, which is exciting. Like, there's other things that have happened in my life that have made me feel good and made me feel successful and proud. But there will be times where I will sit down and be like, man, I'm not a film composer yet. I'm not doing feature films yet. What did I do wrong? Like I start to judge myself for not achieving that goal. And I've gotten to the point now where I know that it's just a feeling and it's going to pass. And there's a reason I'm having that feeling, but that doesn't mean that I'm not successful and I'm not doing what I love and I'm not being truthful to myself. Um, and I don't think that's a unique experience. I think there's many people in the world who fall into that where did I go wrong? Why am I not achieving the goal I set for myself mindset? So again, it all comes back to grace, right? I keep using the phrase grace. People, you need to give
Hmm.
yourself grace because you'll do the things that um, you'll do the things that you're good at, the things that you're proud of, and you'll still be moving forward in life. Um,
Yeah. It's super necessary to keep moving forward to feel fulfilled, but at the same time, we're getting into more philosophical things like life is a journey, not a destination, and trying to first of all compare yourself now to your past self rather than to someone else who's more financially successful and so on, more popular. So yeah, it's such a fascinating, interesting thing to think about. But also, one thing that I think that composers have over other professions is that we don't usually peak at 35. Composers peak later, like in their 40s or 50s, and let's say if a professional sports player is not successful by the time they're 33, they're done. But in our case, we can kind of still continue, to do our work until we're in our 70s. And I I I can't remember his name. Michael Abels, I think, the composer who's done music for Peels. There was. Do you remember that duo, Key and Peel? And one of them
Oh yeah,
came
yeah,
out.
yeah. Oh yeah. So
Yeah,
like Get Out and
yes, get it.
yeah,
So
and Us.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
he's a great composer, dude. I love those soundtracks.
terrific composer, and he's been just involved in the field of like academic classical music composition and concert music throughout his whole life, and just seemingly out of the blue in his 50s, he became much more well known. He got either Oscar nominations or even awards. I don't in case of composers, but maybe in case of other creative professionals, we don't just stop working at 40. We still have our whole lives, provided we have good enough health. And that's
Yeah.
getting back to our conversation about crunching and pulling all-nighters.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's all related, man.
okay, well, Jeff, uh, this is this has been a super exciting conversation. I don't want to keep you here any longer than we need to, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for
Yeah, of
this
course.
very fascinating conversation.
Yeah, sorry again that I couldn't make it down there to actually do this in person, but I'm glad we could make it happen one way or the other.
Do you have anything to plug, like any projects that you'd like to share to
Yeah,
the
so
200 people that are going to watch this,
yeah, so
hopefully?
the two big things right now, personal wise, I'm gonna be releasing that Cyberpunk album either by the end of the year or early January, because I actually have 2 weeks off coming up, and I'm gonna finish it during those 2 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. It should be fun. It's gonna be called King of the Hill, because it's
King of the Hill, okay.
yeah, all the tracks are named after King of the Hill maps in Team Fortress 2. So
Okay.
yeah, so that'd be fun. And then another project I've been working on here and there is a YouTube ARG called Interloper,
And ARG stands for.
alternate reality game.
Oh,
Yeah. So this
terrific.
YouTuber named Anomade is releasing videos every so often for this Source Engine mystery. It's very interesting. I provided a little bit of music for it here and there. So check that out. We're going to be releasing a mixtape with all of the music coming up in the beginning of the year. But those are the two exciting personal things. And keep an eye out for Flintlock, uh, Siege of Dawn. That's the game I was doing sound design on. That should be coming out sometime next year. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure to include the links in
yeah,
the description.
heck yeah,
Okay,
dude.
great.
Thanks.